All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Get Healthy Tampa Bay podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Reller. And today we have Jessica Spackman, who is a registered dietitian, nutrition, and I don't actually know what the what is the other credential?
Registered yoga teacher.
Yoga teacher. Okay, that's what it is. RYT. Okay. Anyway, now that they know a little bit about you, can you tell them a little more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I have my own virtual private practice. I see people all over the country, and right now I'm doing one-on-one consultations. I work mostly with people who struggle with their relationship with food, who maybe have like food allergies or intolerances, chronic diseases, wanting to just overall better their health. So that's what I do in my practice, and then I teach yoga in the community every once in a while.
So the yoga is in person.
The yoga's in person,
Okay.
but I use a lot of my yoga skills, the somatic skills, in my work
Mhm.
with my clients.
Okay. Want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so have you heard about like somatic healing before?
I have, but more detailed explanation is always helpful for me and listeners. Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to their chronic diseases, especially with the gut and the brain, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you probably see this all the time. Like people come in and they're like, I have these stomach issues. No doctor can tell me what's going on. I've done all these tests. They just say it's like IBS and just kind of leave me with, well, you're gonna wake up and have to run to the bathroom, and that's just what it is. And what I find is that there's this huge connection between our nervous system and our physical health. And the way that stress impacts our physical health can cause stomach ulcers is one of like the biggest ones. I'm sure you probably see that very
Mhm.
often. And just other chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases being turned on from a very stressful period in someone's life. When it comes to the eating disorders, that fear of eating, people find that they get very nauseous when they eat. And a lot of that's related to anxiety and stress. So, what I work on with my clients is I help them connect to their breath in order to regulate their nervous system. So, to turn on that parasympathetic part of their brain to allow that rest and digest to happen. So, some of the skills that we'll do are like some deep breathing. So, taking a deep breath in through the nose and then exhale, we're blowing out our breath. A lot of times we're visualizing blowing out any of the nausea or the sickness or any
Mm.
stress or thoughts. So I incorporate a little bit of that into my nutrition counseling as a somatic component.
Yeah,
As
I can definitely see how that is super helpful, especially with your example with IBS or I guess any anxiety provoking things. Luckily, I don't see stress induced ulcers that often. So that is good, but it does exist. And I mean, said about like there's a gut brain axis, which is so important.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying that you're trying to heal. And I think that's a really important approach that people forget that the gut and the mind and everything like are really interrelated. I never heard of anyone using that in the like, nutritional aspect. So it's a really neat and unique combination. Well, how did you get into all of this in the first place?
Yeah, so I had my own healing journey with nutrition.
Okay.
So about 10 years ago, 16, 17, I ended up just having a lot of brain fog and stomach pains that doctors really couldn't tell me what was going on. So I started changing the way that I was eating and ended up clearing my brain fog and then also healing my stomach. And what I found was the reason why my stomach was hurting so much is I ended up having a gluten intolerance.
Mhm.
So even though I had like a celiac test and like a gluten intolerance test, both of those came back negative. But once I removed gluten from my diet, it completely changed. And then I would try to introduce it back in every now and then, and I would get a really bad stomach ache. So my journey started with just recognizing that food could heal the body and that a lot of the food that I was eating, especially in high school and at school, was like very high processed
Mhm.
foods.
Yeah.
And just didn't want to put that stuff in my body. So I ended up going to college for nutrition, learning more and more about it, and then ended up working in mental health facilities as one of my first jobs as a dietitian.
Mhm.
So it was like a Baker Act facility. So for those who aren't familiar with that, it's basically like if someone is going to commit suicide or have like a mental health crisis or in psychosis, they go to one of these facilities. And so I was the dietitian there. And pretty much like 90% of the people that I saw there ended up having undiagnosed eating disorders.
Mm.
So I became very intrigued with helping people heal from those eating disorders and decided to take a lot of those people on as clients in my own practice. So that was my own journey. And then it's interesting that we're having this meeting because once I started healing from the gluten intolerance, like especially in America, a lot of people have this intolerance to gluten, and they say it's because there's like more pesticides on the foods,
Mm-hmm.
more processing of the wheat, and then people will go over to Europe and then not have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I hear all the time from everyone that I'm around. And so after about 5 years of being very strict gluten free, I ended up being able to have gluten again. So I started introducing it back into my diet, and then I kind of overdid it. And now I'm at the point where my stomach's again reacting to it.
Mm-hmm. So are you taking it out again?
Yeah, like I take it out for like 2 weeks and I'll like introduce it and then like
Mm-hmm.
nope, I have to take it out again. Which isn't fun because I don't like being restrictive in
Mm-hmm.
eating.
Right.
If it helps you heal and not feel bad, and it's worth it.
Absolutely. So I've definitely heard like when people go on their trip to Europe, not necessarily with the gluten intolerance comment, but they actually have weight loss, even though they're eating the same type of things that they would be eating here, like pasta and gelato or something like that. Yet I know they're probably maybe walking more because they walk more in Europe, but just because they aren't used those super processed and refined grains probably in their pasta, right? They're making it all from hand. So I find that interesting that you mentioned that as well, like with gluten intolerance. And then did you say 90% of people in those psychiatric units are like undiagnosed with eating disorders? You say 90?
Yeah, from what I saw, yeah. Oh my
Wow.
gosh. Yeah, so many people have undiagnosed eating disorders.
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
that
I mean, so are you referring to like anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating and night eating syndrome, or what would you say?
all the above. All
Okay.
the anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, unspecified eating disorder,
Mm-hmm. Do you
ARFID.
RFID? Yeah, that's what I was about
Yeah.
to ask. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, RFID is avoidant restrictive feeding disorder, right? What is that?
Avoidant restrictive food intake disorder.
Food
Yeah.
intake disorder. Thank you. I did wanted to make that clear in case our listeners don't know that. But so I guess that's how you got into the a little bit more nailed down approach of helping out people with eating disorders as well. And then I'm assuming your food allergy intolerances niche came from your own experience a little bit too. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. It's always nice to hear like person's journey into whatever their profession is, and it's often there's a reason sometimes. So that's a really neat approach. So I guess what are those common misconceptions about dieting and food restriction that you kind of encounter in your
hmm
practice?
Yeah. So a lot of times I see people who when it comes to adults, when I see adults, a lot of times they have struggled with chronic dieting. So this
Mhm.
type of yo-yo dieting where they go on a diet, they lose like 20 pounds, it's not sustainable, and then they gain it back, and then after a couple of years they go back on another diet. And they constantly keep going back and forth, back and forth. I think this is something that a lot of people, especially a lot of adults, can relate to because it's very much our American culture is to
Mhm.
go on a diet, lose weight, be good, eat the right foods, and it doesn't work. So the diet industry, the diet culture industry makes billions of dollars every single year, but it doesn't work. I don't know anyone who has been on a diet who's like, yeah, this has worked and I've felt happy, fulfilled, sustained, and it's lasted. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions and probably like the biggest scam out there with nutrition is all these diet fads. And it's all to, make money, prey on people's insecurities.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be that way. Yes, that's one like the biggest misconceptions that people think is like, oh, I have to like restrict my food. I have to eat just salads in order to be healthy. And that's not the case at all.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to another podcast, and there was one CEO of a multi-million dollar diet company and another one kind of discussing what their methods were. And one CEO's approach is definitely not how to get people to come back. They wanted people to be healthy and heal. Whereas the other one was like, well, asking her like, well, how do you get people to come back? Like, what's the catch? So knowing that, their diet is clearly going to fail and they want to have them try again and again. Like there's totally that approach that it is really just the money making thing. And it's kind of scary, but people will pay anything. It's sad sometimes to, get the quick fix and things like that. And unfortunately, they are taken advantage of. So I agree with that. But how do you kind of overcome like fear and anxiety people might have over food or constant yo-yo dieting or whatever approach how do you deal with that?
It's definitely a really challenging thing for people to overcome. And there's different levels to it. There's the non-eating disorder where you're just kind of like in something that we call disordered eating,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of people have or can relate to. Your relationship with food isn't the best. Maybe you go on diets. And then sometimes it kind of goes to that next level where it's like that eating disorder and that fear and anxiety is really ingrained in someone. And they're afraid that if they're eating consistently, that they're going to have weight gain or they're afraid that they're going to binge. So a lot of the beginning parts of that treatment is a lot of like psychoeducation. So educating them on what an eating disorder is and educating that it is a mental illness. It's not a physical illness. It's very much
Mm-hmm.
something like anxiety or depression. And for whatever reason, the brain just like spirals down and people feel like they lose control over their thoughts
Mm-hmm.
around food or they lose control with their relationship with food. So a lot of it's like educating and bringing awareness to those thoughts that are coming into the mind. Nourishing the body properly is a huge component, and then challenging those behaviors and thoughts through counseling. So I do a lot of like CBT, motivational interviewing in my practice,
Mm-hmm.
and then also having them work with a therapist who can even go deeper with that.
So what about how they approach like their food though? Like you're a dietitian, you're sounding like you do a lot of like psychiatry stuff, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
great. I'm just, pointing that out. Like how do you approach the actual
The actual
food?
food,
Yeah.
yeah. So that would be part of the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of time these people are afraid of like carbs or fats.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the food component is allowing the body to eat the foods that it's craving.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, for example, a common thing that happens is this binge and restrict cycle where people don't eat all
Mm-hmm.
day, then they binge at night, or they avoid, let's say they avoid pizza. And then when they have pizza, they eat like a whole large pizza, like a
Mm-hmm.
binge. And part of that is eating those foods on a consistent basis. Because if you eat pizza every single day, you're not going to eat a whole box of pizza every single day. If you're nourishing the body with 3 meals, multiple snacks, eventually your body's going to say, oh, I'm not being restricted from food, so I don't need to binge as often.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that. And then I also like to take into account like the functional components of nutrition. So recognizing that our bodies sometimes crave certain foods because we don't get enough of the vitamins and minerals that we
Mm-hmm.
need. And so we'll talk about like making sure we get dark leafy greens, fruits, veggies, whole grains, your basic nutrition education to have a well-balanced diet.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of like your body craving something?
Sometimes people will crave like salt and sweets. That's a pretty common thing. And sometimes it's just because you're not allowing yourself to have the sweets and the salts, but it can also be an imbalance of not getting enough nutrients. So it's hard to say like what exact nutrient causes that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like to focus on are like those dark leafy greens, the whole grain. Sometimes I'll toss in like a multivitamin. Zinc's a really popular supplement that people are using these days.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'll recommend a zinc supplement because some people are actually just deficient in that.
Yeah, but I don't usually test it. I did it recently on a patient. Sure enough, it was low. It's like, okay, time to take a supplement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess from that standpoint, like the body craves something. What if do you ever deal with anybody who kind of has an addiction to the salt or sugar?
Yeah, so okay, in the eating disorder world, we're very much like there you can't be addicted to food because your body needs food. But there is a natural response of when our body gets fed like sweets or food in general, it releases serotonin and dopamine because it's rewarding the body to because you're nourishing it. And so it's a natural response. And some people end up having a tendency to eat those foods more often. And a lot of times, whenever I see that happen, and it's not that binge and restrict cycle because I'm restricting, there's a huge emotional component. And that emotional component is oftentimes when they were younger, they lived in like a chaotic family dynamic or they had trauma and they learned to use food to cope with how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that carried on into their adult life. And then they come and see me, and then we have to dive through like 20 years mental stuff. And then that's where we bring the therapist on as well to help with that. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times the people who are craving those sugary foods and even after having consistency in their diet is because of that emotional connection and that release of serotonin and dopamine and not having other coping skills.
Hmm. So I will have to politely disagree with the food addiction comment because I do think
Yeah.
there is such thing as food addiction, and with the downregulation of the, dopaminergic receptor, like neurons, like there's proven science behind that. And I don't think that the DSM criteria really include that or anything yet, but I do think it's going to be coming down the way. So I think food addiction can be real, but I totally agree with what you said, kind of after that. So, but I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think
Yeah.
it's just an interesting perspective there. But yeah, so I think while it's important to pay attention of why someone is eating something and
Hmm.
working through those emotional things, because most of the people when they're eating something, if it's not for true hunger, it's for something else, right? It's for some emotional reason. And learning
Hmm.
they've had all those years of coping with eating it, like, good job on your test. Here's an ice cream cone. Oh man, you won the game. Here's an ice cream cone. Oh, here you lost the game. Here's an ice cream cone. There's always that sense of you're using food for a reason where it's not necessarily for hunger, and that we're all just used to that. So everybody gets used to enjoying and having that dopamine hit. So I do agree with that completely.
So I guess I want to ask you then with what you've seen with the addiction, is it the sugar being the addictive component and like lighting up parts of the brain?
Yeah, I mean,
Is
I would
that
say sugar would be the most common we would say that people are get a quote addicted to. Yeah. And I mean the medications even used for anti-obesity, like the anti-obesity medications often work on that addiction pathway, and that's why they work well, is
hmm
because they're literally targeting those neurons in the brain too. But we can go on a whole nother topic with that. But let's
Yeah.
talk about more about like your kind of focus thing. So you bring like mindfulness and yoga and create a
hmm
healthier relationship with food. And how do you bring that into your practice with the breathing? But what about yoga and everything?
Yeah, so the yoga component is yoga's a really great way for just overall holistic wellness. So it
Mhm.
targets like our physical body, it targets our cardio, strength, balance, our breath, our mental health. So a lot of times when I'm virtual with clients, I don't get to do a lot of yoga
Great.
with them, but we talk about it and we talk about how movement and exercise can be an enjoyable experience and it doesn't have to be like a hit workout all the time. And a
Hmm.
lot of the clients that I do work with, some of them struggle with like compulsive exercise.
Hmm.
So we can talk about how yoga can be a really great way to connect to the body instead of like trying to escape from the body.
Hmm.
So we'll do that. And then a lot of like the breathing, there's a couple yoga poses that I'll recommend too for like nausea that I've learned that
Interesting.
yeah, they do them with like cancer patients who have like chronic
Mm.
nausea. So we'll talk about those and I give them to my clients. I don't know if they help them as much because
Hmm.
they'll be like, well, I mean, it helps in the moment, but then after, it came back and I was like, well, it's a practice. Like you have to practice this all the time in the morning, before bed, practice these breathing techniques because when we're just turning on the parasympathetic nervous system when we need it, it can be helpful. But if we're constantly practicing being in that state, that's when a lot of times you're going to see that transition to that rest and digest mode.
Yeah, I actually think yoga is one of the best recommendations for if someone is like not doing any exercise at all. Sure, get out and walk and move more. But I think the
Mhm.
next thing I go to, like for recommendation, is yoga. And usually I'm just thinking of like, if you're not doing any weightlifting, you can at least get body weight,
Mhm.
strengthening in core with those kind of movements. But sometimes I forget that the whole other point of it is like the stress and practicing mindfulness while you're doing the breathing exercises as well that come along with yoga. So those are really good points. I think it's a good way to also kind of incorporate it with the things that you're doing, especially for the gut healing, which we kind of talked about earlier. But can you just tell me a little bit how you approach patients with food allergies as well? I'm sure we
Yeah.
have a lot of allergy listeners, that's why.
Yes, definitely. So allergies or intolerances or both. Do you want me to touch on both of those?
You can touch on both. Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to food allergy, normally that's something that someone already knows that they have because you
Mhm.
can do some testing and determine that they have a food allergy. So when it comes to those, we just take the allergies out of the diet.
Mhm.
Because again, I mostly work with adults. Like kids are a little bit different where their bodies are still changing and a lot of times they can outgrow their allergies,
Mhm.
but you can also grow into allergies too.
Mhm.
So we will just take it out. So if it's nuts, we'll remove nuts or soy. And I do a lot of education on like, okay, well, what products are going to have like soy or nuts in them, how to check it out, what alternative brands or products can we use in
Mhm.
order to make it feel like you're not being restricted. Because I
Mhm.
think that's one of the biggest things with allergies is having that feeling of being restricted. Uh,
Mhm.
and I don't think that, especially in today's world, we don't need to have that sense of restriction because there's a
Yeah.
substitute for everything out there.
So let me just bring up, we do a lot of allergy testing in our office and people come in, oh, I think I'm allergic to something. If they have something in particular, we will only do those things that they think they're allergic to by blood
Mhm.
and skin test, usually,
Mhm.
because the skin, neither are good tests. The best test is eating it. So we
Yeah.
put those two together and then decide, if it's safe to do a challenge or not. But the other thing is like when they have no idea, we have to do a whole food panel, right? So the whole food panel can just lead to more problems. Like, so we try not to do that because then people, they may have a positive test, so they think they're allergic to it and then they get anxious about it. And then they start doing more food restriction,
Hmm.
which was completely unnecessary. So they're taking out like, shrimp and scallops and all of the crustacean foods when they didn't have to do that because the different proteins that there's only certain ones that they're actually allergic to. It's really important one, to have proper testing. Two, if you didn't have a reaction when you ate it, you probably aren't allergic to it. But it could have been a mixture of things if there was a reaction. It could have been multiple things in one meal or setting. So always keeping that in mind. But then having the ability to go to a nutritionist or dietitian was really helpful as well to kind of tease out if someone had to remove all of these things from their diet, what can we bring back in, right? So making sure
Hmm.
they can get enough of whatever. Like if soy is a pretty big one to have to remove too. So that's important. I think that's really helpful to make sure they can get like all the, balanced diet still if they have to remove quite a few things from their diet. It can be hard, especially with kids.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, those tests aren't very accurate at all.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I have had clients like come and they send me their blood work and they're like, well, I'm allergic to this, 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 and this. I'm like, well, you probably aren't. And really the only way to find out if you're having symptoms. So if you're having bloating, stomach pain, if you're getting hives, that's more like the allergy reaction and it's
Right. So
probably
that's allergy. And when you're talking
yeah,
about the other ones, that's more of intolerances. So why don't you want
exactly.
to talk about intolerances then?
Yeah. So when you're having like those stomach issues and those intolerance, when clients come to me, we talk about like, yeah, there very much could be something that you're eating that your body doesn't like. And there are a couple of main things that we can target, like wheat, soy, sometimes nuts, people can be intolerant to. Wheat's like one of the biggest ones that I see, or like gluten.
Mhm.
So we talk about those things and I look at what they're eating in their day-to-day diet. And I oftentimes will have them start to bring awareness to, okay, are you having any reaction? Dairy's like actually the number one
Yeah.
intolerance that I see.
Of course. Yeah, lactose intolerance. I mean, most of the, I think, Caucasian population does not have the enzyme lactase to break down lactose, right?
Yeah, 75% of the world is lactose
Mhm.
intolerant.
Yeah.
So, of course. So we do like some education and we talk and I look at what they're eating and then I can kind of like narrow it down to a couple of things that I think it might be. And the thing is with intolerances is if you eat a food, you might not have a reaction right away. You might have that inflammation going on in your stomach that lasts like multiple days, and you think it's something else that's causing it.
Hmm.
You think it's five different things because you're still in a
Hmm.
state of bloating and inflammation in your stomach. But in reality, it could just be one thing that's causing that inflammation to last.
Hmm.
So I don't like doing very restrictive diets. Normally, I kind of narrow it down to like a couple of things to say, okay, let's try to remove this from the diet. See how you do for 6 weeks. Be super strict about it, and everything else though is fair game. And let's see how you do. And oftentimes that way we don't have to go through this crazy like elimination diet. It's not very restrictive. And then you don't have that tendency or that chance of the brain switching into becoming like a disordered eating or eating
Hmm.
disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely lots of anxiety and stress around intolerances and allergies. As for the listeners, the allergy part is like an IgE reaction to the protein in the food, whereas the intolerances doesn't have that positive test on the lab work or anything. But just an important distinction. Any other comments on that allergy and intolerances or anything like that?
I think the other big thing would be just listening to your intuition. That's a huge thing, and that's my journey with it was I had multiple negative tests. People say
Hmm.
that nothing was wrong with me, and then ended up listening to my intuition and healing myself from it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of new testing, like with the gut microbiome and things like that. So it's interesting as that becomes a little more mainstream, though it's not right now and not always covered by insurance, but those things might help diagnose things easier too. But as far as, what you're describing, I think, some sort of elimination method is kind of needed and then bringing it back in to see what happens.
Mhm.
Not for food allergy really, but for food intolerances. Yeah. Like, I mean, you don't want to bring food allergy back in until
No.
not until you don't have it. So typically we would do
Mhm.
repeat testing, food challenge and stuff because kids definitely grow out of egg allergy, peanut allergy. They can grow out of these things, whereas, adults typically don't. So, and like you mentioned, you can have late onset allergy stuff too and develop new ones as you are exposed to things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they can go away too. So if you have an
Hmm.
intolerance and you remove it for a couple of years, try to
Hmm.
bring it back into the diet and you might be fine.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that, a possibility, and certainly from your case, it worked out.
Yes, it worked out, but
It
only a
did, and now
little
it's back. But
bit. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, anything else you'd like to share with our audience, Jessica?
Nothing, nothing that I can think of right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And how can people find you if they
Yeah,
want to
so
work with you?
you can follow me on Instagram, the.yogi.nutritionist. That would be a really great way. It has links to my website, and then you can always DM me. And then my website is mindfulnutritionrdn.com.
Perfect. Okay, we'll put all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on. This was a fun conversation. And everybody tune in next week. And if you need, primary care, allergy or asthma, and obesity medicine, you can call my office at 727-446-1087. All right. See you next week.
See ya.